Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure to have with us Mr. Harry Gross, who is Chief of Research at the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. Well, welcome, Harry. We talk about a number of things, and tonight we might discuss a rather, how can I say it, a rather apocryphal event of the 19th century, and that is the Kraft story.
Yes.
And we'll maybe chat about just the details and then what this story might say about the world.
Yeah.
Why don't you just go forward?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about William and Ellen Kraft and their escape from enslavement here in Macon, Georgia, in December of 1848. It was a national event at the time. It put Macon on the map, literally. And so I figured to begin with, we could talk a little bit about kind of who the major players are, right? Beginning with the Krafts themselves. So William was born into slavery in Milledgeville. He had older parents, which becomes important later on. And he was owned by a man named Hugh Kraft, who was a very entrepreneurial trader who frequently experienced businesses' ups and downs. When Kraft moved his family to Macon in the 1830s, in order to cover the cost of that move and some failed investments he'd made, he ended up selling off most of William's family, splitting up his parents. And it gave William this idea very early on that there was no such thing as a permanent family structure under slavery in the South, that you could be bought and sold at any moment in time and be ripped away. He was eventually purchased at auction on the steps of the Bibb County Courthouse because he had been mortgaged by his owner against collateral for a loan that he took out that Hugh Kraft then failed to repay and skipped town. And he was jointly purchased at auction by two local men. One, Ira Taylor, who's kind of an up-and-coming merchant, and then another one, a leading local magnate, Robert Collins.
Who was a physician, I believe.
Yes, he was a physician. Kraft's purchase comes at this very important time where the whole Deep South is actually kind of in financial freefall. The Panic of 1837 was set off by a cotton bubble bursting, and so for years after that, there were all these plantations that were kind of going in and out of business, and slaves were being bought and sold at incredibly rapid paces. So he comes into this situation where he comes to meet his future wife from a period of great instability. He does have a very particular set of skills, though. He is a cabinet maker, carpenter by trade, and his apprentice. And he works out a deal with his owner, particularly Ira Taylor, where he will be able to work on his own in his free time, so Saturdays and Sundays, for independent projects for pay, as long as he gives Taylor a percentage of his earnings. It's basically free rent money at this point. Taylor's renting him out at this point. But it means he has the ability to earn his own money, which was actually technically illegal at the time. But it gave him a good bit of freedom, comparatively. In the course of his purchase by Robert Collins, he comes to meet a young woman named Ellen Smith at this point. She is the half-sister of Robert Collins's new wife, Eliza. Ellen was the product of what was likely a fairly predatory relationship between her father, James Smith, who was a major plantation owner in Jones County, and a teenage slave named Maria. Ellen was a quadroon at this point, so only 1/4 black at this point. She was so white, comparatively, and so resembled her father that she was actually frequently mistaken growing up as a member of the Smith family. And it was a source of huge embarrassment for her mistress, because Mrs. Smith was so, one, ashamed of her husband's infidelity, but also, how dare this slave be counted among my children, my family? And so when her daughter Eliza marries Robert Collins in 1837, Mrs. Smith sees an opportunity to get rid of this kind of mark of shame on her family and gives Ellen to Eliza as a lady's maid.
And she was in the household
yes.
of in Jones County, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
And So really, he was right there in the middle of a Caucasian family, appearing to be Caucasian,
Yep.
but actually in bondage.
Yes.
Okay.
It's one of the it kind of gives the truth, and not as is like to the way that slavery functioned, which was much more of a condition of lineage and power than it is to do with anything about race necessarily. There were plenty of people who were white passing who were condemned to slavery largely because of who their parents were, who their mother was in particular, because slavery was always the descent of the mother. Now, Ellen got lucky in some ways, and she admits this in her memoirs, that she actually had a relatively good experience as a slave. She was recognized as a half-sister by her mistress, so she was highly favored, and she was also a very talented seamstress, and so was able to kind of make herself a very important house slave at a time when many of the enslaved people, particularly in the care of people like Robert Collins, were not getting such a wonderful experience of slavery. And to kind of showcase how white she was, right? This is, I think, an important part of the story. This is a later photo of Ellen Smith Craft after her escape, but compared with a portrait of her half-sister Eliza at that point. And the family resemblance is very clear, but very easy to explain kind of how her escape comes to pass later on. The third important player in this story is Robert Collins. Robert Collins is a very important figure in early Macon history. He is a very prominent physician in charge of most of the care of the city, but he's also a leading capitalist at the time. He is investing in things left, right, and center. He has lots of money, and he uses it pretty well. He helps establish Wesleyan College. He's one of the founding fathers of Wesleyan in 1836. He's responsible for the completion of the Central Georgia Railway that connected Macon to the rest of Georgia. He helped bring running water to Macon in the 1840s and was a partner in the Macon Water Company. And he also paid for the establishment of telegraph lines that linked Macon to the rest of the country, and that point by extension the world. He was also a prominent slave owner at this point. He owned some 10,000 acres of plantation land, dozens of enslaved persons at any given point in time. He had as few as 62 in the 1840s, as many as 106 in the 1850s, kind of varying according to the functions of the market. But he was such a prominent slave owner, he actually was invited to give an address to a delegation of planters in 1853 that was later published as an independent book called An Essay on the Treatment and Management of Slaves. And he was very clear about how he felt about the institution, that it was divinely ordained, and he felt that it was a beneficial partnership. As he says, there is no place on the face of this earth where the Negro race has such security for a wholesome living as the slaves in the United States. He is a wholehearted endorser of this system. And while he writes in this manuscript, I went through and read his essay as part of preparation for this. He is very clear about, trying to say, hey, these need to be treated well, because if you treat slaves well, then they'll work harder, be more productive. And he is very much against the idea that slave owners needed to treat slaves as objects of rage and that they should, withhold provisions from them or that kind of thing. He advocates for, and the 1850s, a fairly humane and what he calls himself a liberal and enlightened view.
And he was also a prominent Episcopalian.
He was,
of
yes.
the time, a very religious person.
He was. There is a window in Christ Church, my church, that is dedicated to his family, the Collins window. He is also a prominent Methodist. He vacillated back and forth.
Not unusual.
Yeah, not unusual at that point. And his wife was an ardent Presbyterian, First Presbyterian. So this is he's a very religious man and a leading figure in the city. And so it is in this context that we get the story of this escape, right? You have a slave in the form of William Craft who is very much inculcated with the idea that family structure doesn't matter, that because they are seen as property and legally they are property, even if they are married and there's a family, they can be broken up at will. You have Ellen Craft, who comes for kind of seeing all of the kind of more of the better side of enslavement, in that sense that she had a relatively benign experience. but also acutely aware of the delicate entanglements that slavery provided as a system, right? This is a system of predation, of power abuses, and it is largely luck if someone makes it out relatively unscathed. And after marrying William in 1846, there is this period of financial crises suffered by the Collins family where there's a real fear among Ellen and William that they are going to be sold at auction. It actually got so bad that they were actually put up for auction, but the estate was purchased by her father, James Smith, and Ellen was transferred to her half-sister's direct ownership, and the house actually was transferred directly to Eliza's ownership as well to try and minimize the damage to Collins's reputation. But there was this real fear that something was going to go wrong.
So
very quickly.
it's a very entrepreneurial figure.
Yes.
With imagining the divine wind will fill his sails.
Yes.
No mistakes.
Exactly. And under the nature of this, right, under chattel slavery, these people are considered property, and so they're collateralized for loans or could be seized by banks for debts unpaid. And he was in 1848, as the story comes to a head, in the middle of a huge fight with William Butler Johnston, who built the Hay House further up Mulberry Street, and was in the middle of being accused of fraud by Johnston, all this stuff. And so there was a real fear that this time they were going to be sold. So William...
So despite the accolades about his moral or how important he was to the community, certainly if one explored his business practices and general other events, there might be another story.
There might be another story, and he was it's the way that capitalism goes, right? Wild successes are often matched with wild failures.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
And people like the Crafts were caught in the middle of this, and so they decide that it's time to leave, that they need to find a way to flee this system. And William and Ellen decide that the best way to do this is to utilize the fact that Ellen is white passing.
Now they were married. Were they
Yes,
legally
they were
married?
married.
And which
there's a question with the legality of it, because they do actually get they get a marriage certificate in Boston later on.
Yes.
Spoiler alert, they get out.
right, but they were.
And they do have a formal ceremony, but they were considered by the Collins and by Taylor to be married.
And they lived as man and woman.
They did not live together, though. William was permitted to visit her, I think, one day a week.
Yes.
Something like that. But Ellen did have her own building. Like I don't know if she had her own house per se, but she had her own rooms.
Yes.
That were hers. And so there was a kind of an arrangement for privacy for them. And it was such that they were recognized as married that the story that they end up concocting to be able to get out is they request travel passes, because for any enslaved person to leave the premises in which they are enslaved, they had to have permission from their owners.
Yes.
And so in order to get these passes, William goes to his owner and says, hey, I need to go with my wife to visit a dying relative of hers. And the owner says, all right, but be back by Christmas.
Yes.
So this is coming up in the holiday season. And Ellen effectively does a similar story. It's not quite as well recorded what she says, but there is the sense that they are going together to a place. That's kind of the official story. So they were recognized at least by their owners in that capacity. Well, on the night of December 20th, Ellen disguises herself as a young gentleman, as a young white male gentleman. She has, through various months or whatever, procured some clothing that looks very fashionable and stylish, and she dresses herself in a top hat with a pair of glasses, and to cover up for the fact that she cannot write. They cannot read or write, and so she can't sign her name for any of these things. She puts a sling over her right arm to basically give the appearance that it's injured, and she was thus unable to sign. And William comes along for this as her slave. That's the disguise they'll do. They come up with this story that under the pseudonym of William Johnson, which is presumably a nod to William Butler Johnson, who Collins feuding with, that he is a young gentleman from Atlanta seeking to go to Philadelphia to receive medical treatment for his arm.
Yes.
For whatever's, because no one in Atlanta can figure out what's going on, and so he's going up there. So that's the story.
Right.
They get with money that William has earned from carpentry. They buy train tickets. A little early for plane tickets. Right. They buy train tickets from Macon to Savannah, And there are a few close calls. A family friend of the Collins ends up sitting right next to Ellen in the car.
Yes.
And she manages to play deaf and pretend that she can't hear what he's saying to avoid detection. Then they take a ship from Savannah to Charleston,
Yes.
where they find out that the ship from Charleston to Philadelphia is not in service because they caught a runaway slave on that ferry, and so they've shut down the line
Oh, really?
for right now. So they end up having to take an overland route. And they do eventually reach Philadelphia on Christmas Eve, 1848. There are lots of close. It's basically dumb luck that they make it out of there in one piece. And they get to Philadelphia and immediately figure out kind of where are the spots they can go,
Right.
through the Underground Railroad. And they begin to make contact with the Underground Railroad. And at first, the plan is, let's stay in Philadelphia, let's figure this out. It's a free state. Nominally, we've escaped slavery. But Philadelphia has very close ties to the South and to Georgia in particular. Dr. Collins had gone to medical school in Philadelphia. And at the time, there were all these prominent Georgians in Philadelphia for a divorce trial between Pierce Butler and his wife, who's an English actress. And it's Butler Plantation on St. Simon's Island.
A rather famous name, right?
Yeah,
Right.
but growing Sea Island cotton down in St. Simon's, and so there are all these prominent Georgians, and there's very close association with the South, and so the Underground Railroad says, "You got to go. Can't stay here. Let's get you to Boston, because Boston is in 1848 the hotbed of abolitionism in the United States." And these people hear this story, this escape, and like, you got to start talking to people. And they announce the arrival of the Crafts into Boston, writing to William Lloyd Garrison, to Frederick Douglass, and pretty soon the Crafts are on the lecture circuit.
Yes.
And so, of course, it does not take long for word to get back to Robert Collins and Macon.
Yes.
So much so that they actually wake up one morning in February to an article in the Georgia Telegraph, which later becomes the Macon Telegraph, that these slaves were clearly these slaves of Ira Taylor and Robert Collins who had gone missing. Right. That they were clearly recognized as such, which is a great way to find out all this news. And so into this chaos comes a way for Robert Collins to try and find out how to get these people back. He waits a little while because he realizes that Boston's too much of an abolitionist hotbed for him to send slave catchers up there and get them back quickly, so he bides his time. Because the national mood is turning. And the question of runaway slaves is central to the tensions going on in the United States, right? In 1848, you had the Mexican Cession, and there's now this question of what's going to happen to the West? Is it going to be slave state or is it going to be free? Yes. California says they're going to be free. New Mexico says they're going to be free. Texas is going to be a slave state. But there's this balance. And so in order to try and minimize the danger of civil war, which is in real talk in 1850, Daniel Webster and Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun all come up with a compromise in the form of the Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act had nominally been on the books in 1793 as a way to enforce part of the Constitution that said that runaway slaves were to be returned, but it had no teeth. This gave it teeth.
Is that right? That was actually in the original Constitution?
Yes, there's a constitutional article, I think it's Article 4,
saying that
Section
runaway
3.
slaves should be returned.
Partly, and so the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1793 to kind of give that teeth and talk about how to do that.
Yes.
Those teeth are pretty toothless by the 1840s, and so by 1850, a new law was passed to really force free states to respect the property rights of Southern slave owners.
That was part of the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act. Is that right?
Yep.
Part of it.
It was part of it. And so in this now, with the arm of the federal government squarely, he feels in his camp, Robert Collins sends slave catchers to Boston after the Crafts. And it's a near thing because they've advertised where they are,
yes,
right?
Yes.
They're on the lecture circuit.
Right.
William Craft is actually harassed in a general store by the brother of one of his enslavers who had come north.
Right, yes.
But they're managed to kind of get around the issue through various legal loopholes, red tape, and their own legal actions.
Yes.
The slave catcher shows up and says, "Hey, I need a warrant." The judge says, "Yeah, I'll give you a warrant, but I got to read through this first. Come back tomorrow." That kind of stuff. By which point the warnings get out. The slave catchers are themselves at one point arrested for trying to kidnap
Yes.
the Crafts. And of course, by the time that all of these legal issues are settled, the Crafts are getting ready to leave. And this comes at a very fortuitous moment. There are rumors the federal government itself is going to intervene because there are riots going on in Boston by abolitionists. And there's a feeling because Millard Fillmore, the new president with Zachary Taylor's death, has said, "I'm going to enforce this." Robert Collins actually writes to the president
Yes.
to ask for federal aid. The president kind of coolly rebuffs
and I think,
him.
didn't they not attempt to use a U.S. Marshal to
Yes.
assist them with this? Yes.
Yes, they did. But by that point, the Crafts are gone.
Yes.
Incidentally, actually, Collins is a state legislator at this point, and his reaction to Fillmore's response to him
Yes.
actually helps lead to the creation of what we call the Georgia Platform, which advocated for a more graduated end to slavery.
Yes.
In the run-up to the Civil War. So he's actually integral to this run-up
Yes.
at this point because of it. But as far as the Crafts are concerned, Boston's too hot. They got to go, and they decide to go to Britain. And so they flee with help from the Underground Railroad to Canada, and then take a ship from Canada to England.
And they receive financial support to accomplish this.
Yes,
Is that right?
yes, and they've been making money of their own. Ellen has been working as a seamstress as well as a lecturer. William as a carpenter, and they get to Britain and they are feted. They are celebrities of the
Yes.
day, and they join the abolitionist circuit there, are lectured. But the big thing they want to do as they're settling down is they want to learn how to read and write, and they actually become patronized by Lady Byron,
Yes.
who agrees to pay for their schooling in the village of Ockham, where your favorite guy, William of Ockham.
Yes, right. He's right. Yes.
Yeah.
That's another story.
Another story, but they end up getting educated in Ockham under the auspices of Lady Byron, right? Kind of all of these different figures,
Right.
And become very prominent. William spends time in West Africa lobbying the kingdoms of Dahomey and Benin to try and end their slave trade.
Maybe
Ellen
some
is,
financial reasons too.
Oh,
so
of
it
course.
wasn't just a total.
yeah, I mean they're
humanistic-
making
there's
a
some-
living
there's
for
some
themselves.
Sort of, entrepreneurial figures themselves.
They are.
Yes.
And Ellen becomes a very active teacher of seamstresses. She ends up helping to lead a protest at the Grand Exhibition, the Crystal Palace,
Yes.
of the American delegation there. I mean, they really make a living for themselves before they finally come back to Georgia in the 1870s, the aftermath of the Civil War. And there they actually open up a school for themselves just outside of Savannah. They open up a school for emancipated blacks. But that only lasts about 5 or 6 years before it's forced to shut down due to financial issues and local tensions, because Reconstruction ends in 1876. And so they are actually chased out of Georgia effectively and end up living out the rest of their lives in Charleston, dying in relative obscurity.
Well, that's quite a story, and you told it well. And I think they produced a book.
They did. All of this is documented in a book that they published themselves in 1860.
Yes.
And called Running 1,000 Miles to Freedom. And it's one of the most compelling slave narratives, but it didn't get the traction of earlier works because the Civil War hits.
You know, I think this is
Right
a tale of merit and of a really insightful look into the conditions in Macon, Georgia, over 100 years ago. The Civil War is there. These events were taking place. And there are a lot of things that are, I think, the story brings up. And one of the things going on was, I believe, PBS actually did recently a documentary on the story. And so it's attracted substantial attention in many ways. Yeah. To me, one of the things that I've considered is the etiology of the Civil War, why the South broke away. And there is, from a purely economic situation, and slavery was quite protected. The argument was really over the West. Yep. But if you were a prosperous slave owner in Georgia, and I think economic issues might destroy your life, but there would be no external force that would end slavery. So in a way, a question I've always wondered about is why would there be such an incentive to break away? And there are many factors on that, but I think one of them is the clash that was taking place in the country between, you could say, the moral part of the psyche of the country, which was connected in many ways with New England, and the settlers that came to New England, and very strong Christian viewpoints, which transmitted itself into saying, well, this is not a good thing. And also the bridges that had to be crossed in the Revolution. So if you look at the views of Dr. Collins, well, everyone has been created in a certain station. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to interfere with, you could say, divine will. Yep. And for many people, the central part of this was the divine connection between kings and where they were bringing forth God's will, if you could say that. And there were stations there. And so the whole idea that God wanted you to be in a particular station, and the thing to do was do the best you could in your station. It was past your power to change that. And so this rigorous social order existed, mm-hmm. and then it was undergoing substantial change at that time. Certainly the Revolution had happened, and many people were saluting George Washington and saying, well, we don't have any kings here. So the tension between that and the religious arrangements and slavery, putting all those together, it would be difficult if you were a very moral person, as Dr. Collins presumably was, to handle this. How are you going to do it? You have a very strict idea that the only way that you can possess slaves is that you're one of God's agents. You treat them morally, and you introduce them to Christianity, and you maintain them as kind of a father, sort of a father figure, in a way. That was sort of the ideal that was.
That was very much Collins' view. He was very paternalistic,
right.
With the understanding that on the flip side, the expectation was that slaves would be perfectly obedient.
The other thing about this is, in the middle of this whole idea, would be that there was the Afro-American slaves were brought here, and presumably all these advantages. At least many people, apologists for slavery, would say this is good. They're here, and so we're now. What did not enter into this? I think this is, to me, the important factor. Okay, I'm a moral person. I'm a very religious time, the Great Awakening. The churches are packed. People take their Bibles, they read their Bibles. Just people on the street are biblical scholars. They know about Ham. They know about different Old Testament things. They see the servants are well mentioned throughout the Bible. Mm-hmm. There are different things that you could imagine would support slavery.
Yeah. Collins' treatise that he writes is filled with biblical references.
Right.
And
so he
considers.
Now, the one thing that's not there, that's my viewpoint, and that means that this is a very justifiable institution in the South. But miscegenation, having sexually exploiting your bondspeople, and having people as slaves that were not the DNA was not exclusively from Africa, was really an extraordinary psychological event. I've thought that this particular story and the response that took place was one of the etiologies of the cause of the Civil War. We only got a minute left. In other words, I think people would say, I can't stand this. I cannot stand the idea that there's I'm reading the Bible every day, and there's a person that's my bonds person there, and they look like me, and but they're not, and the contradiction would be so extraordinary, it would be difficult to handle. And then the people in the North abolitionists were pointing this out, and I would say it just caused this. It was psychologically insufferable, and so the economic benefits that came to slave owners, they sacrificed that for psychological reasons. I'd throw that out.
I don't know.
And this story tells us.
Maybe, but I think that, the Spanish had this experience for centuries beforehand. The Spanish slave codes were very clear that race didn't matter, it was lineage, in the sense that the La Mancha de Esclavitud, the state of slavery, if you had a drop of black blood in you, you were enslavable forever. It didn't matter if you were white as a lily. If you had a drop of black blood, you were enslavable. And so the Spanish had worked this out for centuries. The French did a little bit too.
All right. Right. Well, okay.
Ultimately, I would say that what this case shows is two things. I think one, it does show the inhumanity of the system. Right. This is Winston Place is the half sister of her enslaver.
Right.
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 At this point. But it also showed the divides of federal government. One of the issues and why Millard Fillmore's involvement in this case becomes central to the Civil War is that while Collins and his Georgia platform, very pro-unionist approach, saw it as the federal government is doing their best and is clearly intentioned on respecting our rights as slave owners, his opponents and a lot of the louder voices that end up leading the secession movement said the federal government isn't going to protect us. Washington has no interest in saving this system. We're going to have to do it ourselves.
Well, there are a lot of different fabrics in the psychic weave, but I think that's one of them. I think it's an important story, and it happened right here in Macon, Georgia. And we don't have a lot of time, but so thank you. Thank you.
Of course, thank you for having me on to talk about this.
Very nice. Thank you.